I write children's books, and mostly, and then I write children's books and I write nonfiction left history. But I'm here as a children's book author, and my name is Meg Starr, and this book is my most printed book, Alicia's Happy Day, and I'm here to talk about weaving the political and the fictional together from a children's book author's perspective.
Can't beat that. My name's Terry Bisson. I'm a science fiction writer primarily, but also edit and write other kind of books. I've written a biography of Lumia, actually, which was mostly not imaginary, and but I mostly write science fiction.
Now we're all supposed to read a little something from our work, but I guess we're just introducing ourselves
Yeah,
first. So I'm Ken Wishnia, and my main claim to fame is what? That I guess my first novel, 23 Shades of Black, was rejected by agents and editors for years. One reason, largely because of its political content. I finally gave up on the notion of commercial publication, self-published, and it was nominated for the Edgar Allan Poe Award and the Anthony Award. And and then that led to commercial publication, which had its ups and downs there. But anyway, but now I've landed on my feet with PM Press, reprinting them, and they showed up in a whole bunch here, actually. So that would be great. And I also, my latest is a Jewish-themed historical set in Prague in the late 16th century. And I think we definitely talk about the issues of being specific with politics in a contemporary novel versus being cloaking things and setting it in a different era and making people think, oh, I'm not talking about politics. So,
is the goal in it?
Of course.
S.J.
I'm S.J. Rozan, and I've been reading Terry for years. He doesn't know that. I didn't tell him that before, but I have. I'm a crime writer. I have 13 novels and, I don't know, 3 dozen short stories. My books are inevitably political. I think fiction is inevitably political, unless you go out of your way to be self-absorbed and kind of navel-gazing. But we can talk about in what way they're political. And I think crime fiction especially is inevitably political and is well, good crime fiction. I'm talking about good whatever. And is torn because crime, on the one hand, all crime is a blow against the system. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean good politics. But there's always a tension for the investigator and in crime fiction. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, I'm Susie Day, and I'm totally intimidated by you guys.
Oh, we're very scary.
Oh, yeah? Well, you each have books, and I don't.
I have one about
it. I have a book about not writing a book. I basically have done a satire column for years and billions of years. I think in my next life, I'd like to be a reporter or somebody who does very well with facts and like systemic analysis. Because I'm really attracted to reality, but then it sort of attacks me. I can't really handle it.
That's the best line I've heard all day.
Yeah, because it's reality is like the U.S. military prisons, the broad and police violence against citizens, mostly Black and Latino. It's absolutely overwhelming, and so my reaction to it is not to report on it like Jeremy Scahill would, which I admire. I try to do some sort of satire as a means of sort of getting through the emotion of it to come out with some sort of moral, illogical reaction and sort of trying to package a terribly painful reality into something that's a little more manageable. So.
But that, I don't know.
No, go ahead.
That has a huge, long history. I mean, that has a very storied history. That reaction. So this is sometimes the only thing to do. So.
Yeah, well, from a modest proposal.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of.
Back.
Yeah.
But sometimes reality is just so weird.
But sometimes there's kind of nothing funny you can say too.
Yeah.
Under some
and that's the whole thing about satire. It's very particular. Some people are offended by certain things, and other people love it. So, you know, you're never going to be terribly popular as a satirist, I don't think. Anyway.
I had a question. How many people here are writers? I was
All right.
afraid of that.
You afraid of that?
Yeah. Well, when you read, that's interesting. We were gonna maybe give a little sample of everybody's stuff, and I still think that's probably a good idea. But you know, very short. Everybody just give an idea of what you're about, and then I wanted to move from there into a general discussion of how to do this. Susie, you look raring to go. Susie's kind of, she's, I think of her as the Stephen Colbert of fiction. It's all very dry.
I was sort of going for James Thurber, but feminist.
James Thurber, that'd be good. All right, so let's do that.
Okay, a lot of what I write is like faux news, not unlike Stephen Colbert, but you know, a lot of it isn't. This is just one that's a good example. I had a very intense emotional conversation about Sean Bell being killed right the night before his wedding ceremony with somebody. And it wasn't funny at all, but you know, you get under something and then you go over it and you sort of like try to look in a kind of detached mathematical way, and you ask something like, well, what if the roles were reversed? So I wrote, I'll just read an excerpt from this news item. Police gunned down another rich white man. Hours before he was to be married, a wealthy Caucasian man leaving his bachelor party at a country club in East Hampton was shot and killed in a hail of police bullets. 2 of his friends were wounded, 1 critically. Witnesses at the scene expressed shock and outrage. One of the club's patrons voicing the pervasive sentiment, why, oh why, is it always rich white people who suffer at the hands of bigoted, trigger-happy cops? Details of the shooting were not immediately clear, but relatives of the dead man, James Bellwether IV, age 23, and community leaders, including Martha Stewart, demanded an investigation into what some call an overreaction by officers. Witnesses told of chaos, screams, and a barrage of gunfire near the Club du Beau Latte at about 4:15 a.m. after Mr. Bellwether and his friends walked out of the club and began an altercation, during which one of the men allegedly shouted, "Yo, get my gun." The men then got into a golf cart, backed up onto the newly seeded lawn, and drove into an unmarked police car bearing several plainclothes police. In response, 5 terrified officers fired at least 50 rounds at the men's cart. Irate bystanders later explained to officers that the gentlemen in question had been arguing about stock options and decided to settle their differences amicably by a round of impromptu skeet shooting. One of the men then asked his butler, Yosworth, to fetch his skeet shooting rifle. Mr. Bellwether, who was to have been wed at 5 p.m. yesterday, was shot in the neck, shoulder, and right arm, and was taken to Our Lady of Etna Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. So that's
Our Lady of Etna. Fabulous.
All right, I'd only add that nobody's ever shot Steve with a rifle. You have to have a shotgun. But other than that,
Can you just tell about the times when people tell the newspapers where your stuff is printed that their fact checker is fucked up because you know Dick Cheney never said that?
Oh, yeah, people have complained that this didn't happen. I checked Google and I didn't find it anywhere. Mm-hmm. But, you know, this was taken from, I almost reversed the words in a New York Times article. You know, phrases like overreaction by officers is totally out of the Times about, you know, a white reacted to a black community thing. You know, so anyway. So it's just one of many attempts, you know, to kind of make sense out of reality. Anyway.
okay. S.J.?
And I have not nearly as much as it looks. 2 short pieces, and one is from my latest book, which is about the world of Chinese art and about Chinese politics and about political prisoners in China. But it also is about the power structure in the art world, and that's, I'm going to read you that passage. And if I get a chance, I'll read a different passage from a different book, but I'm going to read this now. The speaker is a Chinese-American private eye, a young woman named Lydia Chin, and she's with her partner, a big white guy named Bill Smith, and they're at an art gallery. The portly man we'd seen in the gallery could be found now leaning over a table, or rather, leaning over a young Asian woman who was seated at the table. His thick hand rested on her shoulder, thumb gently rubbing the back of her neck. The young woman seemed to be trying mightily to click through photos on a laptop, not reacting to his touch or the closeness of his mountain of flesh. I caught a sheen of perspiration on her brow. Both their heads turned sharply when the door flew open, hers in hope, his in anger. "Damn it, Caitlin," he roared. "I said no interruptions." "I'm sorry, Mr. Haig." The assistant trembled. "He wouldn't, I couldn't, they didn't." "No, I wouldn't, and she couldn't, and we didn't," Bill agreed, striding forward, hand thrust out. "Bill Smith," he beamed, "happy to meet you." Haig obviously didn't share Bill's delight. Staring at Bill, Haig said, "Caitlin, go. We'll talk later." "I really am sorry, Mr. Haig. Go." He waved Caitlin off like a bad smell. She faded weakly out the door. After another few moments of eyeball chicken with Bill, Haig took his hand off the young woman's shoulder and growled, "You, too. Get out. This work is shit." She looked at him, uncomprehending. "But Mr. Haig," her English was heavily Mandarin accented, "you say you interested." "In you, honey, not in this crap you do. Last night was fun, but the magic's gone. Get lost." "But my paintings won't be shown in this gallery. Eco humano, we are the worldo. Are you serious?" "Unfortunately, I think you are. Beat it." The young woman sat open-mouthed. "Your English doesn't include beat it?" He turned to me. "Tell her what it means." Taken by surprise, I said nothing, barely managing to keep my own jaw from dropping. "What the hell's the matter with you people? What is this, Chinese Don't Talk Day? You, honey, leave." Uncertain, the young woman stood, her face ashen. "I come all the way from China because you say..." "I said I'd give you a shot. I did. It's over. Leave, and I'll do something for you. I'll forget your unpronounceable name. Hang around and argue, I'll remember it, and you'll never show anywhere in New York, not even in the Great Z galleries that specialize in this shit. Never, honey. Ever." A 2-second pause. "Why are you still here?"
Right.
I'm talking there about power.
So we're not supposed to like that.
Yeah, you're not supposed to like that guy. You're supposed to hope he gets his in the end. All right, and should I do another one? You want this, because this is very short. This is on a whole other subject. I wrote a book. Every now and then I get into an S.J. Rozan explains it all for you kind of, mode. And as soon as the killings at Columbine happened, I knew what that was about. And what astounded me is how long it took kind of everybody else to catch up, I heard one of the teachers at Columbine immediately afterwards being interviewed. She was in shock, she's crying, and she's saying, "How could this happen here? This is a perfect place." And I'm thinking, that's exactly how it happened. You did not see, nobody saw what was going on, and you're all blaming the wrong people. At the same time, it is dangerous, and this whole book is about high school football, but it's dangerous to blame high school football, to blame football. The jocks are all bad guys, and this is all, evil, and the unjocks are good guys, and that's very dangerous too. So this is, the detective here is struggling with both these issues, and this is Bill Smith, this is the other guy, the big white guy, and he's watching TV. After a beer commercial came the main event, skateboards racing down and then up a pair of huge concrete ramps. The competitors tried for flips, twists, airborne jumps as they sped between the two. The third kid to start, reigning champ according to the broadcaster, pulled off the double somersault he was going for, but wiped out on the landing, his board flying one way, he another. He hit hard and didn't get up. Medics swarmed around him, and other kids, too. One brought back his board. He held it out, as though the sight of it would be enough, could make the kid rise, could roll the clock back just far enough to make this a mistake, a ref's bad call that could be rethought and revised. "You hate to see this," the commentator said in a hushed voice. The same guy who whooped and shouted, "Yes, he's going to try it," when the move began. And I thought, do we? Do we hate it? Or is seeing this, The football player rushed off the field in a cervical brace, the race car bursting into flames as it smashes the wall. Is it this that gives us the limit, reminds us of what we forget as we go through our days, that something is actually at stake here? Sometimes the only way to know where the line is to cross it. Is this young kid motionless at the bottom of the ramp, the threat and the promise we keep coming back for?
Cool.
Thank you.
By the way, she's too modest to say that she won the Edgar Allan Poe for that book, so.
For that book, yeah.
Winter and Night. Oh, sure.
Thank
Okay. Well, I'm really interested to see where this one will go, because, this is such a different group from which we usually get, and we have time to talk about it, so I'll just read three very short bits. One, I'm just going to read the opening sentence here, just to set the scene.
What's the book's name?
Oh, this is 23 Shades of Black, which PM Press is pushing downstairs, but let's see, I brought one book to give away to the best question. Best question gets a book. You have your choice, but we'll talk about that. So yeah, all this happened a few years ago when Ronald Reagan was busy making tuna fish hash out of the national budget and trying to learn which countries belong to South America, and the second wave of punk still ruled the East Village. So that's my opening, and you are not supposed to start a popular novel that way. One that is going to instantly alienate half of America. And I sort of think of was it Michael Jordan who's kind of criticized a little bit for all those promotional ads he was doing for Pepsi and sneakers and everything, and his comment was Republicans buy sneakers too. And yes, I agree that there's something, it's a little bit sort of career suicide to do that, but I also feel like, well, if you liked Reagan, fuck you, you're not going to like this book. So I'm going to tell you in the first sentence, don't bother. But the other issue is it does have to do with my character. This is set in the early 80s. My character is an Ecuadorian American immigrant, so she's a Latina in the early 80s when, the Reagan administration was busy carpet bombing chunks of El Salvador.
She's the first person narrator, too,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So this is not necessarily your voice. This is her voice.
I mean,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, she's braver than I am. Again, supporting mass murder and torture in Guatemala, mining harbors in Nicaragua. So how do you think she's going to react to that sort of stuff? I guess, the key thing is, though, I don't think any of us want to read a political tract in the middle of a novel, but, I guess the thing about this character is, yes, she does exist in the world. She does pick up the paper and see what's happening, and she's a beat cop. And one of the key things in there is that she really does risk her life to bust low-level drug dealers, and then reads about, gee, the CIA is paying off the Contras in cocaine. What is going on here? And so that's a key thing. So just for example, she's partnered with, this is back in the early 80s when she would have been not only one of the first women cops, but one of the first women of color on the police force. So she's not just a woman in a man's world, she's a Latina woman in a white man's world. And her partner really doesn't like her and doesn't let her drive or anything like that. So, they're in the car together, and once inside the car, I use the paper to build a wall around myself and hide Bernie from my sight for a little while. On the front page is the major U.S. news. I see that 3 days after telling reporters at a press conference that the USS Nimitz, which is only the largest friggin' warship in the fleet, was nowhere near the Gulf of Sidra, Reagan and company have shot down 2 Libyan planes in the Gulf of Sidra with jets launched from the Nimitz. Reagan himself is staring into the camera as if he's telling the reporters, oh, that Nimitz! Oh, sure, that Nimitz is in the Gulf of Sidra, yeah. So, this is an example that, as I say, I don't go into these rants, but reality is there, and in fact, I'll just read one very short bit. This was another moment where in the first draft there was this long rant. She does bury herself in the paper one more time, and it does mention this about the Contra thing. And, this is the early 80s, so, South Africa is still under apartheid, Nelson Mandela is still in jail, and, there was a photo in the paper that just really impressed me, which had, it was just this crowd of angry South African, black folk attacking a guy who was sort of an alleged collaborator. No proof, but they were going to set him on fire. And Desmond Tutu, who had not yet won the Nobel Peace Prize, is fighting his way into the center of this crowd, trying to save this guy's life. And I'm just thinking, that's bravery. And so I had all these things, and ended up saying, at this point in the story, I've established who she is, you know her attitude towards this stuff. Nobody wants to hear this rant, so I ended up with just this. 2 inches from my face, buried in the last paragraph on page 37, it says the CIA is paying mercenary pilots in cocaine and other drugs to fly weapons to the Contras in Honduras. And I wonder how many throats will be slit before they're through, how many women will be raped, how many wombs will be ripped open before the place is safe for democracy. So I think that's a much better sentence, not only because it's not a page and a half of rant, but it's also, how can you disagree with that? If I rant about the CIA, somebody else could say, well, sure, but the ends justify the means sort of thing. But, really? Anyone going to come out in favor of slitting throats and ripping open women's wombs? No. So I just think, that's I think that fits into what we're talking about here is sort of, yes, this character is more political than others, but I still have to rein it in. And, I can only do a bit, but so
Well, that introduces 2 questions, which I'll just put out before we go on. One is, how do you introduce the politics? You can do it through the character, or you can do it through somebody who reads a paper, or there's all these mediums, which is kind of interesting. But let's push on. Do yours.
When I wrote this, I was working in daycare in East Harlem, but I'd also spent a number of years doing solidarity work with the Puerto Rican independence movement. And one of my frustrations was simply a very simple one, a lot of teachers run into it, finding books that reflected to the children I was working with the neighborhood they were in and their own life. So that's where it came out with, but I'd been working on the case of a political prisoner whose name was Alicia, and I wanted to dedicate my book to the political prisoners of the Puerto Rican independence movement. That was a no-go with the publisher completely. And so this is sort of my little, didn't mention I didn't have to mention to the publisher that I just put her name in the title. It's just my little.
You true grounded knife.
Who's the publisher?
Starbright Books.
Okay.
So what is the title? Alicia what?
Alicia's Happy Day. And the illustrators also lived in East Harlem, and they're interestingly enough, they're a husband and wife, African American and Chinese American, who adored East Harlem. So sort of an interesting collaboration of us. And it's really hard reading children's books to adults, but just I'll just
We'll
I'll
pretend
just-
like we're asleep.
Yeah, right. We'll all throw off. Just go back and. May you have a day that's twirly swirly. May you hear salsa and start to dance. May the flags all fly for you. And of course, this was the page where I planned to have the Puerto Rican independence with the Puerto Rican Day Parade. But the Puerto Rican Day Parade was particularly after Jerry Seinfeld under attack at that time. My publisher wouldn't put it in. So this is like, may the flags all fly for you. I pictured all these beautiful flags. And also it makes it less identifiably Puerto Rican and more Hispanic, which covers a larger audience. So, there we go. The taxi cabs all stop for you. Airplanes right in the sky for you. The walk signs say walk in time for you.
It's urban fantasy, right?
Yeah, it's just like, and the pigeons bow shiny necks to you. While the friends decorate in chalk for you. May the orange lady give a ribbon of peel to you. And the icy man say, helado de coco for you. May mommy and daddy hug you. Auntie Penelope sing to you. Baby Anibal give his bobo to you. May you laugh as loud as you want with no one to stop you, because all of us, we're all for you. And that's why we sing happy birthday to you.
Very good. Well, now we are going to get into some literary criticism here, too, because this is one of the traditional, most ancient forms of political narrative, which is utopian fiction, but on a very personal level. It's a very personal utopia. That's one way you do it. I'm just going to read a very short thing. I have a novel. It's about 1968, and it's a sort of a alternate history of 1968, and it's told from the point of view of a bunch of hippies in the mountains out in Colorado, and they're sort of seeing things happen.
What's the name of it?
Huh?
What's the name?
The name of the book is Any Day Now, and it's, anyway, Lowell was back. We missed you, said Annie. How was the funeral? The Rockers were sitting on the deck of the dome watching the sun go down over Blanca, sharing a 6-pack of Walters and a plastic bottle of Cutty Sark, Lowell's treat. Funerals are all the same, he said. Boston was mean. Everyone is holding their breath. Did you get to New York at all? Clay wanted to know. Barely. Both the tunnels and the GW were closed for almost a week since the attack on the UN building. The first missile took out a lounge on the 14th floor. 11 died. No one claimed responsibility, but the NYFD was demobilized after refusing to respond, and renegade elements were thought to be responsible for the second missile, fired from Queens, which had missed and taken off the top of the American Prudential building on 39th and 5th Avenue. The city was now under UN mandate, and blue helmets were everywhere. So, does that mean New York City is no longer part of the USA? Clay asked. It never was, said Lowell. Isn't that what we loved about it? That's actually a pretty broad, fairly broad selection. And I think the question, or what we want to talk about, is how do you present politics in a narrative? And yes.
So I have a question that would only apply to three of the 5 of you. But it struck me, I mean, I read all of Lydia and Bill's work, and I'm not familiar with other people's work, although I'm intrigued. But I'm wondering if you and, what is your name?
Ken.
Ken, and are you Meg?
Terry.
You're
Meg.
Meg.
The 3 of you particularly, just based on what you read, if you could talk about the politics of writing in the voice of another, both in terms of gender and race and identity politics. I mean, both Bill and, and just the characters that you
That's a good question, too. Yeah, because that's one of the things. One of the ways you do it is through, I don't know, we want to talk about that right now? Yeah.
Do you want to start with your question, or?
Yeah, let me start with, well, that's one of the I mean, I'm hoping all of us will engage in some of these questions. Yeah.
That's a political question, though.
It's a political
I
question.
mean, it can be, depending on who your character is.
Definitely, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a great
If
question.
it weren't, you could answer.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say, that's a good place to start, actually, because
Yeah.
part of the
S.J.
politics of yours is a Chinese American
Yeah.
and Chinese private eye. Is she a regular?
She's
And also
absolutely, yeah,
white
she's
guy.
a
I mean,
series,
you're not a
yeah.
white guy.
Yeah, I have these 2 series characters. One of whom is a Chinese American, young Chinese American woman, and the other is a slightly older than she, white man. And I write in the first person.
Isn't he
in
Irish
both
American?
voices. Irish American, he's Irish.
Thank you.
Right. And I am neither, I mean, and I write in the first person in both voices. And it's an interesting question, and it came up when I started writing as Lydia, because I don't see myself writing as Lydia, but people read it, and I walk into a room and people say, gee, you don't look Chinese, which I think is a great compliment, but I understand, the issues, and it has come up, and what's interesting is that it has not been raised to me by an Asian, but it has been raised by white people. And I take this to mean that either the Asians don't mind, or the ones who do mind don't even speak to me. I don't know. My position, and what does not get raised, interestingly, is what people say, who are you to write as an Asian woman? They do not say, who are you to write as a white man? And I think what's happening is that there is a power hierarchy, and it is considered legit to write above you on the hierarchy, but not below you. That's colonization. And I understand that, and I can sympathize with people who feel that way. My feeling is the question of whether you have a right to do it really can't be asked. Because as soon as you start with that question, you start with what you do have a right to do. And there, that's one of those long slopes. If I can't write as a Chinese woman, can I write as a white woman? Can I only write as a Jewish woman? Can I only write as a Jewish woman from the Bronx? So on and so on, So the question I'll discuss endlessly is whether I've done it well. And even whether it's possible to do it well, I'll discuss that. But not whether it's okay to do it. The male thing is another thing because, as I say, people don't question my right to do that. I am more suspect about my own ability to do that than I am about Lydia, because honestly, a Chinese American woman is someone I understand better than a white man. Men are more of a foreign territory to me than women of another culture. But I try, and people know I'm a woman. It's they don't always know I'm not Chinese, but they know I'm a woman. So
is that why you call your books by S.J?
No, that's because my actual name is Shira, and when I was growing up, nobody ever heard it, and everybody was calling me Shira Rozan all my life. My name is Shira Rozan, and it made me nuts. And I thought, gee, I have an opportunity to change that. And nobody, my mother was unhappy, but that's it. I never looked back. So that's where the S.J. comes from. So anyway, that's my take on that.
Well, Ken, you cross gender and nationalized. So
So you're doing the same thing. You're in a sense you're colonizing in two senses. So do you get that objection?
Actually, the same thing. No Latina has ever said, "How dare you do this?" In fact, I've had Latinas come up to me and say, "How did you know this? This is my life." And it's mine too. Actually, it's a little bit sort of what Virginia Woolf writes about in A Room of One's Own about writing. I mean, it's not really possible. She does say, you should try to get out of your what does she call it? Oh, God. Androgynous. She tried to do androgynous writing. I mean, she's writing in 1928, and we can question that. But I think it's a legitimate question to ask because there is that, what's the Education of Little Tree? I'm trying to remember this book from about 20 years ago, where in fact, yes, the guy was committing ethnic masquerade. He was, he was presenting himself as, this was, a book by a Native American who had been oppressed, and it turned out, no, he was a white guy who was an ex-member of the Klan and all this kind of crap, and that, he was cashing in on, the empathy that people would have for his oppressed ethnic character. So, that's not what I'm doing, although the first edition also just had my initials and no photo, so people didn't know that, but, I started doing that way back actually in the 80s, getting my age away here, but, starting to sign K Wishnia, just because I just wanted to be gender neutral. I wasn't trying to pretend to be something, and that actually began because I think, like a lot of writers, I teach at a community college. I see tons more of this than most of you should ever have to be exposed to, but lots of very adolescent, self-projection fantasy type writing, and it was my goal to get away from that, so I figured, okay, let me at least start writing about people who aren't me, and I'm going to write about women characters, and I'm going to use K Wishnia, and the number of letters I got back, Dear Ms. Wishnia, the Berkeley rep actually said, finally a feminist play that isn't just nothing but anti-male bashing. So it had a female character and said K Wishnia, and they were convinced a woman had written it. And I wasn't committing masquerade. I wasn't pretending I was to fool them or anything. But there's a lot of the reasons we can talk about that, but I would say, the character in this, the main character, I've written 6 novels, 5 of them with my Ecuadorian American woman, and this is my first with a male character, and he is, a male Jewish character who's going prematurely gray. People would think, this is the hardest damn thing I've ever had to write, because it just came from so much deeper within me that it was hard to do. And I think, having mentioned the term ethnic masquerade as a negative, I will say that, but writing as Philomena is sort of like those Halloween outfits that people put on, and it's really a reflection of themselves, but suddenly they start acting in a way it really is an expression of themselves, but they can do it more freely now because, I'm wearing a mask, So it's a bit of that. I mean, really, I tell people, people ask, is she based on your wife? Because I'm married to an Ecuadorian American woman, and I always tell them only her good qualities, all of her insane, self-destructive streak. That's me. So
Well, Susie, now you don't have this problem because you write in a sort of a false journalism voice.
Usually, but actually I also have a character called the Mad Activist. And I've
Is that based
written,
on Laura?
No, it couldn't be more me. Because it's like you take all these like huge realities about being a peace activist and yet wanting to kill the people you're working with non-violently. Yeah, it's just you put in all the emotional contradictions. So yeah, that's pretty much totally me, just slightly more exaggerated. So yeah, I don't think I've ever stepped into an explicit other. I mean, I've written as men. I mean, you're right. Writing up is totally fine. I never thought twice about it. I guess
Didn't you write as the guy who killed Matthew Shepard? Didn't you do one?
Yeah, I did sort of this faux monologue.
As a way of.
Oh, that'd be a tough one. Yeah, that's a stretch.
Yeah. So yeah, it's sort of like whatever the truth of whatever voice the truth comes through about something that I feel, and sort of going under the situation and sort of dealing with things emotionally. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking of the questions that this raised, and as I said, a lot of them are technical questions. How do you get the politics in there? Do you have somebody read the paper? Do they watch TV? And then, but I'm realizing that your question cut to the heart of it, because 60% of fiction is who's telling the story and why are they telling it, and so the voice is really the first political parameter, and I never even thought of that. And then you have, with that, you don't have a question of writing up or down. Yours is like a gift you're giving somebody, right?
That's the way I felt about it, and then I didn't want to write another one, because I was feeling like, let Puerto Rican people write their books, have their voice. And I was very self-conscious about it, and my publisher was leaning on me and leaning on me and leaning on me for a second one. And I, because this is a big moneymaker in a small press way. And I was feeling really conflicted about it. What I think another thing I would say is that when you're writing into a voice of oppression, one of your responsibilities is to struggle with your racism, the same way it is in any other way that you're meeting with the people who are oppressed. If you are of the oppressor nation, when you're meeting with people who are oppressed, you're struggling with that in each form of your activism. I think it's the same way when you're working on your writing. Is this I had somebody read it for me from the independence movement who caught something that was actually this weird stereotype that came from that wasn't really, it didn't have anything to do with the way Puerto Rican kids in the city. It was like some image I had of people in Soweto playing with stuff and putting together junk and making toys from it. Had nothing to do, in East Harlem, are you kidding me? In the 80s with HIV and stuff like that, kids were practically wearing gloves on their way to school. Nobody was letting their kids play with garbage. It was totally a stereotype and came right out of my head into my writing and had to be gotten rid of. So that certainly was a thing, and it's true. It was like I had this person in the independence movement who was my mentor who kept saying, when you do the political work, the subjective will come. It's like you bring, this meshing of the minds comes from reaching out that way. And, so when I showed this to him, he was like, you see that? The subjective has come. This is your... And then, when I complained to people that I didn't really want to do another one, and they said, why not? Go for it, do it. If you're getting published doing this is better than nobody getting published doing this. And I realized that for a long time I thought Ezra Jack Keats was black, and he's not. He's he does famous crossover early black children's fiction, and it's not from that place. However, when I did try to write my second one, I went from the realm of utopia into what I felt next about this character, which was that she would be evicted. because you know what happened to East Harlem, right? So I wrote a book about being evicted, and my publisher didn't want to publish it. So
Imagine that. Yes, please.